Today we're going to start by defining some terms for poetry, looking at the different types of poetry you might come across and perhaps the different meters. So what is poetry? Well, if we were going to define it, it's a type of literature that expresses ideas, feelings, or tells a story in a specific form, usually using lines and stanzas. So when we first look at poetry, one of the first questions you want to ask is the point of view. Who is telling you the poem? Well, you start with the author, known as the poet. You also are going to look at the speaker. Now, the speaker of the poem is the narrator of the poem. It doesn't necessarily mean the poet themselves are telling you the story or describing in the poem, but the speaker of the poem is the narrator. Now, when we look at a format of poetry, we're looking at the appearance of the words on the page. When you look at the words on the page, they are broken down into two groups. One of them would be the actual lines, the group of words together on one line of the poem. Now, if you have a group of lines arranged together, almost as in what we would usually call a paragraph in writing, we call that in poetry a stanza. A stanza is a group of lines arranged together. So if you look at the example on the right-hand side, we have two stanzas. A word is dead when it is said, some say. And then the second stanza, I say it just begins to live that day. There are 6 lines here. And the form is the appearance that it looks like. So we can see that we've got a lot of white space around it. We can see that there are 2 stanzas, there are 6 lines. Now there are different types of stanzas that have actually been named. So we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 line stanzas, and they all have different names. A 2-line stanza would be known as a couplet. A 3-line stanza is known as a triplet or a tercet. A 4-line stanza is a quatrain. A 5-line stanza is a quintet. A 6-line stanza is a sestet or a sextet. A 7-line stanza is a septet. And an 8-line stanza is an octave. So usually you would probably just call what look like paragraphs in poetry stanzas, but there are specific stanzas where we usually count out from 2 to 8 lines, and they do have these names. Now, sound effects that you might find in poetry. When we look at the general term of sound in a poem, we call that rhythm. The rhythm is the beat that is created by the sounding of the words as you hear them in the poem. Now, rhythm can be created by meter, by rhyme, by alliteration, and by refrain. So then what is meter? Well, meter is a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. Now, meter can occur when the stressed and unstressed syllables of the words in a poem are arranged in a repeating pattern. You hear that same stressed and unstressed syllables over and over and over again. Now, when poets write in meter, they count out the number of stressed or strong syllables and the number of unstressed or weak syllables for each line. And then they repeat the pattern throughout the poem. Doing this in a pattern creates a lot of rhythm. There are specific types of meter that have been named. After all, when we look at one unit of meter, a stressed and unstressed, that is going to be considered a foot. Now, a foot can have 2 or even 3 syllables. It usually, however, consists of 1 stressed, and then you might have 1 or more unstressed syllables. Now, the types of feet are determined by the arrangement of stressed and unstressed syllables. And so we might name our different types of feet. So if you had a 1 unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, there's only 2 syllables in the feet. One is unstressed and the second one is stressed. We call that iambic. If it's backwards to that, if you have the stressed syllable first and then the unstressed, it is known as trochaic. Now remember, you could also have 3-syllable words. If you have 1 stressed syllable with 2 others, that would be considered a foot. Now anapestic would be unstressed, unstressed, and then stressed at the end. Dactylic, you start with your stressed, and then you move on to unstressed and unstressed. So when we start counting the number of feet on a line, we have words for that as well. And you can see on the right-hand side, we go from 1 to 8, kind of like we did with the different lines in a stanza. We do the same with the different feet. So you could have up to 8 feet in a line perhaps, and we'd have names for that. 1 foot on a line would be a monometer. 2 feet on a line is a dimeter. 3 feet on a line is a trimeter. 4 feet on a line is a tetrameter. 5 feet on a line is a pentameter. 6 feet on a line is a hexameter. 7 feet on a line is a heptameter. And 8 feet on a line is an octometer. Sometimes you do not have metered poetry. Free verse poetry does not have any repeating patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables. It will not have rhyme as well. Now, free verse poetry sounds more like a conversation. It sounds like somebody is talking with you, and it's a more modern type of poetry. You also have blank verse poetry, where it feels like you've got the strict metered poetry and free verse poetry together. Blank verse poetry is written in lines of iambic pentameter. You still have feet. You're going to be counting. There still is a rhythm. But it does not use end rhyme. For example, if we look at Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, you'll see a lot of blank verse. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. Of all the wonders that I yet have heard, it seems to me the most strange that men should fear, seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come. So what Shakespeare's trying to do is he's trying to help the people who are memorizing the lines by giving them a lot of stressed and unstressed syllables, a lot of meters, in order to help along with the rhythm. However, he wants it to sound conversational. People have a tendency not to use end rhyme when they're just speaking aloud, so he uses blank verse poetry for this reason. We also use rhyme quite a bit in order for us to get that sense of poetry. Now, words that sound alike because they share the same ending vowel and or consonant sounds are considered rhymes, like the words lamp and stamp. Notice they share a short A vowel sound, and they share the combined MP consonant sound at the end. And of course, a word will always rhyme with itself in case you see the same two words being used. Now, usually you'll notice rhymes at the end of lines and stanzas, and so a word at the end of one line rhymes with a word at the end of another line. For example, Hector the collector collected bits of string, collected dolls with broken heads, and rusty bells that would not ring. So string and ring in this essence are end rhymes. You might also have internal rhyme. Now that will be a word inside line rhymes with another word on the same line, like we saw in the previous words, Hector the collector. That would be an internal rhyme. They're two words that rhyme on the same words on the same lines. We might also see them within and not completely at the end of the lines. For example, from The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, we have once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary. Notice the word dreary and weary rhyme, and yet dreary is not at the end, and therefore it is not an end rhyme. And then finally, you might also have some slant or near rhyme. It's also known as imperfect rhyme or close rhyme. The words share either the same vowel or consonant sound, but they don't have both. Something has to be similar and something has to be different in order for it to be slant rhyme or near rhyme or close rhyme, such as the words rose and lose. They have different vowel sounds, that long O and oo sounds. However, they share the same consonant sound, that Z sound at the end, rose and lose. Thank you so much for stopping by to start learning about how poems are built together and looking at our vocabulary terms. I certainly have got a lot more poetry terms, so if you'd like to learn more about those, please leave in the comments section what more you'd like to learn about poetry, or check out my playlist on poetry. You might find what you're looking for. And as always, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel. Thanks for stopping by.